My brothers and sisters, welcome to episode number 11 in the book of Genesis. And today I'm going to call this your critical element. So, man's going to be created with some common stuff and uncommon stuff. Let's find out about it. This is in Genesis chapter 2. I'm going to start with verse 4. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created, in the day that the Lord has made the earth and the heavens, when no bush of the field was yet in the land, and no small plant of the field had yet sprung up. For the Lord God had not caused it to rain on the land, and there was no man to work the ground. And a mist was going up from the land and was watering the whole face of the ground. Then the Lord formed the man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living creature. And the Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east. And there he put the man whom he had formed. And out of the ground the Lord made to spring up every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. All right, so we're going to learn today what happened to creation, and it's heading towards what happens to the account of the generations as we go forward. So today is the creation of man. So just a couple of observations before we get to that main point, which is that God plants the Garden of Eden and puts man there. And it's also for man, it's also for himself. So it must have been an incredible design. It'll be fun to learn about it someday. The other thing that caught my attention was that trees were made, first of all, to be pleasant to the eyes. Now, we know that there's fruit trees and fruit trees for man, but there's a lot of trees that are not particularly beneficial to man with regards to food, but they are almost all beneficial because they're pleasing to the sight. So making things pleasing to the sight was a part of God's plan. All right, so the moment when man was created, there was no shrubs, no rain, and there was nobody to work the ground. So a garden without a worker is not quite right. And one of the main calls of man is to work the ground. So man was formed then from the dust from the ground. He's sculpted. The formed thing is the same word that would be used like a potter. So we are sculpted by God. So that's cool. And then we were made out of existing stuff. So you've heard the term that man is a carbon unit. Well, it's not exactly true because there's actually more hydrogen, about 3 times as much hydrogen than carbon. But the point is, we're made out of common things, carbon and hydrogen, calcium and phosphorus. And don't you just love it that eventually, when we figured out what we were made of, this was written way before people knew that the Bible was right. And we find the most critical element here. So here's the big deal, is that God breathed into the nostrils of man the breath of life. So here's where the physical being comes alive. And this physical being becomes a spiritual being that is capable of having a relationship with God. And it's a permanent creation. So the people that you know, everybody that you've met, never dies. So what is created here is going to be immortal, just like Adam and Eve are immortal. So death does enter. We'll get to that in a couple of days here. But everyone you meet is going to live forever, and it's just a question of where and what address they're going to be at. It makes sense that God is immortal and has the capacity to grant immortality to his creatures. So everybody you meet in heaven, we just did Revelation, turn there if you wish, but you'll find angels and four creatures and humans, and everybody there is living forever. So upon what we call death, really is just a change of address. So we go to paradise with Jesus, and then we return at the second coming, and then we're going to eventually live permanently in the New Jerusalem on a new earth. So contrast that with the punishment of the rebellious who have a different address, but what they do have is immortality. Immortality. So this human is granted this ability to live and to have a relationship with his maker. And man, it becomes a living creature. So nobody protests at this point. Your creation is not dependent on your will, yes or no. Your very existence is kind of an argument for God, and it testifies to God as creator. So one, a person cannot rebel at this point. And we are made of earthen material and of supernatural material. It is this life and this penalties uh, that has penalties for taking it. So ironically, the exact rationale for the death penalty in Exodus 21 is not that we want to take the life of another, but if you do take the life of another, out of respect for this element of creation, that is, that the breath of God is in that person, that's actually the rationale. That's a society, not an individual, but the society is supposed to take that person's life. So biblical Christians are often pro death penalty. Why? Out of respect for life and out of obedience to Exodus chapter 21. Okay, so let's make some conclusions here. That my form is sculpted by God. It's His idea and His intent. And we are, all of us are, permanent. And we are made from some very common stuff, hydrogen and carbon and oxygen. And we are also made of some extraordinary stuff. So, what is common is very, very common. And what is extraordinary, the critical element, is not dust, it's not oxygen, it's not carbon, it's not hydrogen, it's the very breath of God. So, your critical element is the breath of God. Your critical element is God's breath within you. So, let's today go and live like it. Thanks for listening.